My name is Amelia Carson. I wasn't going to go. That's the truth I haven't said out loud. The invitation came in the mail, tucked into a glossy cream envelope with thick gold lettering that smelled like cologne and formality. Retirement. Celebration for Richard Carson, it read, with my father's name etched in bold as if he were royalty. There was no handwritten note, no warm message scrawled at the bottom, just my name printed in small, mechanical font, like a reminder. I was a guest, not family, not daughter, just a name on a list. I held it in my hands for a long time, staring at it until the corners curled. I even tossed it on the kitchen counter next to unpaid bills and grocery receipts, hoping if I ignored it long enough it would become insignificant. But of course, it didn't. My husband saw it and asked gently if I planned on attending. I shrugged, said I hadn't decided. He said maybe showing up would bring closure. Maybe it was time to stop running from the silence. So I said yes. I didn't wear anything dramatic, no red lipstick, no statement necklace. Just a navy dress that fell to my knees and a pair of modest heels that didn't click too loudly. I kept my hair down, brushed straight, the way my father always preferred. It wasn't for him. I told myself that. But a part of me, God, a small stubborn part, still wanted him to look at me and not flinch. Still wanted to believe there was something salvageable. As we drove to the venue, I stared out the window, my fingers tapping quietly against my knee. I remembered the last time I saw him 10 months ago in his office, his face red, his words sharp and final. That night, he told me I had disappointed him, that I'd chosen ambition over family, but I went anyway. I showed up with a quiet smile, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this night would be different. That maybe my father had made room for me at his table. I didn't know then that he had planned to humiliate me in front of everyone. I didn't know I was walking into a war dressed for peace. The venue was grander than I expected, vaulted ceilings, chandeliers spilling soft light, tables dressed in white linen and polished silver. A string quartet played near the bar there, music drifting through the chatter of men in tailored suits and women with practiced smiles. It was the kind of event where people measured each other's worth by the weight of their watch or the name on their wine glass. I stepped through the double doors, my husband's hand warm on the small of my back, and felt a familiar tightness in my chest. I saw him almost immediately. My father stood in the center of the room, surrounded by a semicircle of admiration. Colleagues, former clients, and distant relatives hung on his every word, their laughter just a little too loud. He wore the navy suit I had once picked out for him years ago before everything soured. For a second, I hoped he'd turn, that maybe his eyes would soften when they met mine. But when our gaze locked, all I saw was steel. He gave a tight nod, impersonal, like I was someone's plus one. Then he turned back to the crowd. No hug. No welcome. No, I'm glad you came. We were seated near the front, though not close enough to feel important. My name card was printed with the same mechanical font from the invitation, placed beside guests who smiled politely but didn't know what to say. I caught snippets of conversations around me, mentions of his accolades, the legacy he was leaving behind, the brilliant next generation he had mentored. No one mentioned me. I tried to keep my smile steady, but it faltered with every passing toast, every back pat he gave someone else. My hands folded and unfolded in my lap. I could feel the invisible line he had drawn in the room. One side for the people he was proud of, the other for me. I sat there, sipping water, pretending not to care. But the truth was, I felt 12 again, back at the dinner table, waiting for him to ask how my day was, only to watch him praise my brother for something he barely tried at. The ache in my chest was all too familiar, and it was only the beginning. I spent most of the evening folding and unfolding my napkin beneath the table, pretending I didn't notice how many people glanced at me, then looked away. There's a particular kind of invisibility that comes not from being ignored, but from being deliberately unacknowledged. That's what I felt like. I had been erased, but only just enough that my absence would still sting. They knew who I was. Of course they did. The daughter, the one who used to work at the firm, the one who left or got pushed out depending on who was telling the story. No one said it outright, but the air was thick with what they didn't say. Their curiosity sat like dust on the corners of their conversations. I heard my name only once, whispered behind a flute of champagne. It stung more than silence. My mother came over at one point. She looked beautiful, like always. I stood to hug her, but she gave me that half embrace she saves for public moments, affection choreographed for the crowd. You look nice, she said, her voice low, careful. Thank you for coming. She didn't ask how I'd been, didn't mention the past year, just smiled tightly and drifted away before I could respond. Across the room, my brother was laughing with a group of my father's oldest partners. They clinked glasses and told stories that all blurred into one big celebration of male legacy and achievement. I used to be in those circles. I used to believe I was being groomed for leadership. But somewhere along the way, I stopped fitting the version of success my father had imagined. Maybe I asked too many questions. Maybe I stood up too often when I was supposed to stay quiet. And now, here I was half a guest, half a scandal, fully alone. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled, grateful for his steadiness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing on something that used to belong to me. I was no longer part of the story they were celebrating. I had become the cautionary tale they whispered about when they thought I wasn't listening. I remember the moment in pieces like shattered glass you can't stop stepping on no matter how careful you are. We had just finished the main course, though I couldn't tell you what I ate. My fork had mostly moved food around on my plate while my mind drifted elsewhere, counting the ways this night had already gone wrong. I just wanted a glass of water, something to hold, something to ground me, something to keep my hands from trembling. I reached across the table, stretching past a decorative vase that blocked half my view. My fingers grazed the stem of a water glass when I heard it, his voice, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the clinking of cutlery and soft laughter. You don't belong at this table anymore, Amelia. Not after the choices you've made. The room froze. No one spoke. The kind of silence that follows disaster, the kind that makes your ears ring. I stayed bent slightly forward, still holding the glass. I hadn't even lifted it yet. I just stood there, frozen in a half movement, as if time had caught me mid-breath. A tea first. I thought I had misheard him. I must have. There was no way he'd say that. Not here, not like this. But when I looked up, his face confirmed everything. Cold, unapologetic, triumphant even. Like he had waited for this moment. Planned it. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened as my eyes darted around the table. My mother was looking at her lap. My brother had stopped chewing. Someone across the room shifted uncomfortably in their chair. My shame was suddenly on display for everyone to dissect. Dressed up as discipline, he had finally said what he'd been hinting at for months. Not with subtle jabs or veiled comments, but in front of strangers and family and old colleagues who barely knew me. He hadn't just rejected me, he had publicly exiled me, and all I had done was reach for a glass of water. There's a kind of stillness that doesn't come with peace. It's the kind that comes after a blow, when everyone in the room holds their breath because they're waiting to see what you'll do next. That's where I stood, still halfway bent over the table, my hand wrapped around the glass, my face burning hot while the rest of me went cold. The room had gone so quiet, even the music seemed to hesitate. And no one moved. No one spoke. My father went back to his plate like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just gutted me in front of 100 people. I stood there, stunned, staring at the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders after soccer games, who once told me I could be anything I wanted. And yet here he was, older, harder, angrier, someone who had decided long ago that my success was a threat instead of a triumph. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to ask him why here, why now, why at all, but I didn't, because part of me already knew. This wasn't just about the choices I'd made. This was about control, about punishment, about reminding everyone that he still held power even as he was handing it over. And the most efficient way to do that was to crush the one person who had dared to defy him. My eyes darted across the room. Some people avoided looking at me altogether. Others gave that hollow kind of sympathy that comes with tight-lipped expressions and tilted heads. My own mother wouldn't meet my gaze. That hurt most of all. Not because I expected her to defend me, but because her silence confirmed what I feared. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been sanctioned. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I felt like I was shrinking in real time, folding into myself while trying to hold together what little dignity I had left. My knees wobbled, my stomach turned, my voice abandoned me, and just when I thought I'd drown in the silence, someone else stood up. He stood so quietly that, at first, I didn't even notice. My thoughts were still spinning, trying to catch up with the weight of what had just happened. But then I felt the shift in energy beside me, calm, steady, resolute, and when I turned, I saw him, my husband, standing tall, one hand resting gently on my shoulder like an anchor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't match my father's theatrics. He simply looked him in the eye, like a man who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. His voice, when it came, was firm and level like stone wrapped in velvet. "You may not see her worth," he said, "but your company does, because starting next month, she'll be your replacement's new boss." A wave of silence rippled through the room again, this one deeper, heavier. It wasn't the stunned silence of humiliation. It was the silence that comes when truth crashes into ego and shatters it in front of an audience. I didn't move. I couldn't. His words rang in my ears, loud and clear, almost surreal. My father blinked once, then again like he'd misheard. His fork paused midair, his jaw clenched. He looked at me now, not like I was a stranger or an inconvenience, but like he was seeing a puzzle he hadn't solved. Like he couldn't understand how I had managed to build something without him noticing, and I watched him, not as a daughter begging for approval, but as a woman finally stepping into the light he had spent years trying to dim. The thing he couldn't see, what none of them could see, is that while he was busy talking over me, I had been listening, learning, and building. Quietly, precisely, my hands stopped shaking. I didn't need to say a word. My husband had said it for me. And in that moment, the man who had tried to strip me of my worth was forced to see it laid bare in front of the very people he'd tried to impress. He had silenced me, but he couldn't silence the truth. I hadn't planned to tell him that night. Not like that. The promotion had been finalized just a week before, in a quiet boardroom with quiet nods and quiet handshakes. No fanfare, no speeches, just a contract and the silent understanding that the company needed a new kind of leadership, mine. And I hadn't told my father because deep down, I didn't think he'd care. Or worse, he'd tried to take credit for it, tried to twist it into something I owed him, but now it was out, and there was no taking it back. The board had reached out to me months ago, after years of ignoring my ideas when they came through him. They noticed how the strategies I proposed, once dismissed as too risky or premature, had quietly taken root elsewhere. I had built something outside the walls he tried to trap me in. I had grown without his permission. When I left the firm, he told people I was burned out, that I wasn't cut out for the pressure. But the truth is, I was tired of being spoken over. I was tired of watching less qualified men get applauded for whispering the same things I had shouted. So I left, and I waited, and while he clung to the power he thought no one could take, I earned mine. Now the people he once bragged to were looking at him differently. Not because I embarrassed him, but because I didn't need him. Because I had value he couldn't control. I could see the confusion in his eyes, how he searched for a way to deny what was already done. My husband sat back down, his hand finding mine. It was warm, steady. I still hadn't spoken. I didn't need to. The room had seen enough, for years. He told me the world wouldn't take me seriously without his name behind mine. But now, that same world had chosen me without asking for his blessing, and that was the betrayal he hadn't seen coming. It didn't take long for the fractures to show. You can only pretend nothing's changed for so long before the tension cracks the surface. My brother was the first to react. He pushed his chair back so abruptly it scraped against the floor, making heads turn. He didn't say anything to me, just looked at our father, then back at me, his face caught between disbelief and something close to fury. He walked out without a word, his footsteps echoing down the hall like punctuation. My mother stayed seated, her hands folded in her lap, knuckles pale. She finally looked up at me, and for a second, I thought I saw something in her eyes, regret, maybe, or sadness. But it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by that familiar mask she always wore when emotions got too loud. She turned to her wine instead of me. Across the room, the air shifted. People whispered behind napkins, behind hands, behind careful glances. A few offered me quick nods, their expressions unreadable. Others avoided eye contact altogether. My father, once the centerpiece of the night, sat quietly now, chewing slowly, as if the food could somehow anchor him to the moment slipping away from him. This was his celebration, his night, his curtain call. But now, his legacy had a shadow and it had my name. I wasn't proud of how good it felt. That's the part I wrestled with later. But in that moment, after all the years of trying to earn his praise, of dimming myself so he could shine brighter, I felt something I hadn't in years. Seen, not liked, not embraced, but seen. He had built this empire with precision and ego, but he had forgotten that daughters watch quietly, that we learn, that we remember. The times we were told to sit still while others were handed our future. He had underestimated how deeply I had listened even when he thought I wasn't worth hearing. That night, he lost more than control. He lost the illusion that he could shape my story, and I stopped asking for a seat at his table. I didn't storm out. There was no need. That would have made it feel like he still had the upper hand, as if his words had the power to break me. But they didn't. Not anymore. So I stood, slowly, and picked up my clutch from the table. My husband rose beside me without a word. The way he looked at me then, not with pity, not with pride, but with quiet understanding, meant more than any speech I could have made. The room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp or applaud. It simply parted silently, the way it does when something sacred walks through it. Not everyone understood what had just happened, but they felt it. That shift, that undeniable truth that something had ended and something else had begun. I didn't look back at my father. I didn't need to see his face to know what was there. I imagined the tight line of his mouth, the way he probably sat rigid in his chair, pretending he hadn't just been blindsided. He'd want to reclaim the narrative, spin it into something manageable. But it was too late for that. The truth had already filled the space between us. Heavy, permanent. As we walked toward the exit, I could still hear the clinking of forks, the low hum of conversation trying to return to normal. But it wouldn't. Not really. You don't unsee. The moment a man is stripped of the illusion that he controls everything around him, you don't forget the silence that follows a reckoning. Outside, the air was cooler. I let it fill my lungs as I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders. My heels clicked softly against the pavement as we made our way to the car. I exhaled. Finally, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying the weight of needing his approval. I wasn't mourning a relationship that had never really existed. I wasn't trying to fix what he had broken. I was just done. And that kind of freedom, it doesn't come in fireworks. It comes in a quiet, steady walk into the night. Head high, heart whole. It's strange how power doesn't feel the way you imagine it will. There was no sudden rush, no triumphant music swelling in the background the day I walked into my new office. Just quiet, soft morning light spilling across the polished desk. A nameplate resting where his used to be. Mine now. Amelia Carson, Director of Strategy. I stood by the window for a long time that morning, watching the city unfold below. People rushing, lights changing, life moving forward without pause. That used to terrify me, that everything could move on without me. But now, it brought comfort. I didn't need to chase belonging anymore. I had built something real, and it didn't need his permission. The office was 2 floors above where my father once reigned. That detail wasn't lost on me. I saw the irony in every step I took past. The people who used to dismiss my ideas with polite nods and tight smiles, now, they paused when I walked by, not out of fear, but recognition. I wasn't the girl tagging along anymore. I was the woman who stayed quiet long enough to listen and then long enough to outgrow them all. There are still moments I think about that night, not because it hurt, though it did, but because it marked the exact point where I stopped shrinking. He wanted to humiliate me, wanted to strip me of something in front of everyone, and maybe, for a second, he did. But what he didn't realize is that I had already outgrown the seat he tried to keep me in. His table was too small for the woman I had become. Now, I sit at a new table, one I helped build, one where I make room for the voices people like him always talked over. And when I look across that table, I don't see my father's shadow anymore. I see women like me, steady, scarred, and unapologetically powerful. He once told me I didn't belong, and maybe he was right. I belong somewhere far greater than he could ever imagine.